The galactic assembly convened in the sphere of voices, a vast chamber carved from living crystal that floated in the void between stars. Representatives from 800 civilizations filled the tiered galleries, their forms as varied as the worlds they came from: luminous beings of plasma, hive minds housed in mechanical frames, gaseous entities contained in shimmer fields, and countless others. But despite their differences, one thing united them all: fear. At the center of the sphere, a holographic projection displayed a region of space that every species knew, though none had visited in recorded history. The quarantine zone. A perfect sphere of space 12 light-years in diameter, sealed behind barriers that had stood for over 100,000 galactic cycles. The barriers themselves were architectural impossibilities, walls of folded spacetime that glowed with a pale violet luminescence, etched with warnings in a language that predated all known civilizations. The warnings were simple, translated by instinct rather than scholarship. Do not enter. Do not question. Do not remember. The Eternals of the Void had placed these barriers before the first starships flew, before the first radio signals crossed the cosmos. And then the Eternals had vanished, leaving no explanation, no key, no instruction. Just the barriers and the warnings. Until 17 cycles ago, when the first pulse emerged. It had been subtle at first, a rhythmic disturbance in the quantum foam, a whisper of energy that shouldn't exist. Then it grew stronger. The pulses came regularly now, every 30 rotations, each one slightly more powerful than the last. And 3 days ago, a section of the barrier had flickered. Just for a microsecond. But in that instant, the assembly's most sensitive instruments had detected something emerging from within. A signal. Not a cry for help. Not a message. Just a pulse. A heartbeat. Something inside the quarantine zone was waking up. The barrier is failing, announced High Arbiter Kelnoth, a crystalline Zenari whose body refracted light into prismatic patterns. Our xenophysicists estimate complete collapse within 200 cycles. Perhaps less. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices, clicks, whistles, electromagnetic pulses, and telepathic bursts, all competing for attention. We must reinforce the barriers, demanded a Threxian warchief, his 4 arms gesturing aggressively. Whatever the Eternals imprison must remain imprisoned. Impossible, countered a luminal scholar, her photonic form flickering with agitation. We don't understand the technology. We can barely detect the barriers, let alone repair them. Then we destroy what's inside, the Threxian growled, before it escapes. And if that's precisely what we should not do? This voice cut through the chaos with quiet authority. It belonged to Vera Thane, commander of the Krelith Exploratory Service. She stood in the lower gallery, her crystalline body catching and holding the light in ways that suggested both fragility and immense strength. The Krelith were known throughout the assembly as the finest investigators and scouts, a species that had survived the death of their original sun by learning to read the subtle patterns in the universe itself. Vera had mapped more unknown sectors than any explorer in modern history. She had walked on dead worlds and living ones, had communicated with intelligence so alien it defied categorization. But she had never entered the quarantine zone. Explain, Commander, Kelnoth said, gesturing for silence. Vera moved to the center of the chamber, her footsteps chiming softly against the crystal floor. The Eternals were not conquerors or destroyers. Every artifact we found, every fragment of their civilization suggests they were builders, gardeners of reality itself. They didn't imprison threats, they cultivated potential. You're suggesting whatever is inside is, what? Being protected. A Minter diplomat rippled with skepticism, his liquid form contained in a transparent walking sphere. I'm suggesting we don't know, Vera replied. And ignorance paired with fear produces only catastrophe. Send me. Let me investigate before we make irreversible decisions. The debate that followed lasted 3 hours. The destroyers argued for immediate military intervention. The preservationists wanted to construct new barriers, to buy more time. The isolationists suggested the entire assembly should flee to another galaxy, leaving the quarantine zone behind. But Vera's proposal held a terrible logic. Someone had to know. Someone had to look. In the end, the vote was close. Vera was authorized to take her ship, the Crystalline Truth, through the failing section of the barrier. She would observe, record, and report back. Under no circumstances was she to make contact with whatever existed inside. And under no circumstances was she to enter the third planet's atmosphere. The Crystalline Truth was a masterpiece of Krelith engineering, a ship grown rather than built, its hull a lattice of living crystal that could phase through obstacles and repair itself from ambient energy. Vera had piloted it alone for the past 15 years, ever since her research partner and life bond, Kaylee's, had died exploring a quantum anomaly. She had volunteered for this mission for reasons she didn't fully admit to herself. Perhaps she was still looking for answers about what had killed Kaylee's. Perhaps she simply couldn't bear not knowing. As her ship approached the barrier, Vera felt the familiar tightness in her crystalline matrix that passed for anxiety among her kind. The barrier loomed before her, a wall of twisted spacetime that her instruments could barely render coherently. It looked like frozen lightning, like the moment before creation, like the edge of thought itself. The failing section was obvious. A dark patch where the violet luminescence had dimmed, where the warnings flickered and stuttered. Vera took a breath, unnecessary for her species but a habit she'd learned from studying oxygen breathers, and activated her phase drive. The crystalline truth slipped through. For a moment, everything inverted. Up became down, light became sound, and Vera felt her consciousness stretch across dimensions she couldn't name. Then reality snapped back and she was through. Inside the quarantine zone. Her instruments screamed with data. There, at the center of the sphere, a yellow dwarf star, unremarkable by cosmic standards. 8 planets, asteroid belts, the usual debris of a mature solar system. But there was something else. A presence. A weight in the fabric of spacetime itself, as if the universe was paying attention to this place in a way it didn't pay attention to anywhere else. Vera brought the star system into focus. The third planet immediately drew her eye. It was beautiful. A blue-green marble wrapped in swirling white clouds, with vast oceans and multiple continents. Spectroscopic analysis confirmed liquid water, oxygen-rich atmosphere, complex carbon-based chemistry. Life. But not just life. Civilization. Vera's initial scans revealed electromagnetic transmissions, organized light patterns suggesting cities, even primitive satellites in low orbit. The civilization was young, perhaps a few thousand cycles of recorded history at most. They were broadcasting radio signals, launching chemical rockets, splitting atoms. Children by galactic standards. She moved her ship into high orbit, keeping her stealth systems at maximum. Below, the planet rotated serenely, unaware of her presence. Vera began cataloging the dominant species. They called themselves humans. Bipedal, bilateral symmetry, endoskeletal. Average height 1.7 meters, mass 70 kilograms. They reproduced sexually and lived approximately 100 orbital periods. Their civilization was fragmented into competing nation-states, their technology uneven, their art and culture dizzyingly diverse. They seemed ordinary. Except for one thing. Vera's instruments detected anomalies. Tiny fluctuations in local spacetime, quantum uncertainties that shouldn't exist, probability fields that were subtly but measurably warped. At first, she thought it was background radiation from the barrier. Then she realized the truth. The anomalies were coming from the humans themselves. Specifically, from their minds. Every human brain generated a faint but distinct field. Something that wasn't electromagnetic, wasn't gravitational, wasn't any force her instruments were designed to measure. Yet it was there. And when humans gathered in large groups, when they focused their attention collectively on stories, art, or ideas, the field synchronized and amplified. They were warping reality. Subtly. Unconsciously. But measurably. Vera spent 3 days in orbit, watching, recording, trying to understand. She observed their cities lit against the darkness, their ships crossing their oceans, their signals carrying voices and images and music into space. She watched them love and fight and create and destroy. And slowly, a terrible suspicion began to form in her crystalline mind. On the 4th day she detected something else. An energy signature coming from a small moon orbiting the planet. Not human. Not natural. She approached carefully. Hidden in a crater on the far side of the moon was a structure. It was partially buried, clearly ancient, and radiating the same violet luminescence as the barriers. An eternal installation. Vera's ship extended a probe. The structure responded immediately as if it had been waiting. Data flooded her systems, not in any language she knew, but in pure conceptual packets that her mind could somehow interpret. An archive. A warning. A confession. Vera read it 3 times before she could believe what it said. The humans were not a young species. They were the oldest species that had ever existed. Billions of years ago, before the current galactic cycle, before the Eternals themselves, there had been the architects. Beings of pure consciousness who had shaped the fundamental constants of the universe, who had decided that light would move at a certain speed, that matter would clump into stars, that entropy would flow in one direction. They had been gods, essentially. And they had been utterly devastatingly alone. For eons, the architects had created and refined and perfected. But perfection, they discovered, was death. When you could reshape reality at will, nothing surprised you. Nothing challenged you. Nothing mattered. So they had made a choice. A choice so radical that the archive struggled to convey it. They had chosen to forget. They had compressed their infinite consciousness into finite forms, woven themselves into the fabric of a single world, and imposed limitations upon themselves: mortality, ignorance, vulnerability. They had become human. But they hadn't died. They had slept. And in sleeping, they had dreamed the universe into being as it was now, complex, chaotic, filled with other minds, other perspectives, other forms of beauty they could never have imagined on their own. The Eternals had discovered this truth. And they had been terrified. Because the architects were still there, dormant in every human cell, every human thought. And if they ever woke up, if humanity ever remembered what it had been, the universe itself might unmake. Or remake. Or simply cease, if they decided consciousness was suffering and silence was better. So the Eternals had built the barriers. Not to imprison humanity, but to let them sleep. To give them time to evolve, to grow, to become something new. Something that might choose to remain mortal when given the choice. But now the sleep was ending. The archive showed Vera readings from the planet below. The reality warping fields were growing stronger. More focused. More organized. Humanity was approaching a threshold, not through technology or enlightenment, but through the simple accumulation of minds thinking, creating, imagining together. Every story they told made the universe a little more like the story. Every invention reshaped the laws they thought they were discovering. Every dream trembled at the edge of becoming real. They were waking up. And they had no idea. Vera sat in her ship, surrounded by data she wished she'd never found, faced with a decision that would define the future of the galaxy. She could report this to the Assembly. They would panic. The destroyers would win the vote this time. They would sterilize the planet from orbit, exterminate humanity before it could awaken and reshape existence. Or she could say nothing. Let humanity wake on its own. Risk everything. Vera looked down at the blue planet rotating peacefully below. She thought of Kaylee's, who had always believed consciousness was sacred, regardless of its form. She thought of the 800 civilizations of the Assembly, all the life and art and struggle they represented. And she thought of the humans below, living their brief lives, loving their families, creating their art, completely unaware that they were gods who had chosen to be mortal. There was a third option. She could warn them. Vera set course for Earth's surface and began composing a message that would change everything forever. Behind her, unnoticed, the barriers around the quarantine zone flickered once more. The final pulse had been sent. The awakening had begun. The emergency session of the Galactic Assembly convened within hours of Vera's transmission. This time the sphere of voices was not merely full, it was overflowing. Representatives who normally sent proxies attended in person. Species that had not spoken in the Assembly for centuries materialized to cast their votes. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension, filled with overlapping translations and the electromagnetic discharge of 1,000 anxious minds. High Arbiter Kelnoth stood at the center, his crystalline form dim with stress. Around him, holographic displays showed Vera's data, the archive findings, the reality warping signatures, the historical records of the architects. And most damning of all, current readings from Earth showing the awakening accelerating far faster than predicted. Commander Thane has violated her mandate, declared War Marshal Krexther, the Threxian military commander. His 4 arms were locked in a gesture of formal accusation. She was ordered to observe only. Instead, she has maintained orbit for 7 days, gathered unauthorized intelligence, and now proposes the unthinkable, direct contact with a sleeping god species. The sleeping is over, Marshal. Vera's voice came through the communication link, steady despite the hostility. Her ship remained in high orbit around Earth, maintaining position. Whether we act or not, humanity is waking. The only question is whether they wake alone, confused and potentially hostile, or whether they wake with guidance, with context, with choice. Choice. A luminal representative flickered with agitation. You speak of giving choice to beings who once shaped the laws of physics themselves? Who chose to sleep because their power made existence meaningless? What choice can we possibly offer them? Vera had spent the last 7 days asking herself the same question. She had watched humanity from orbit with a focus that bordered on obsession. She had observed their wars and their peace treaties, their art galleries and their slums, their acts of breathtaking cruelty and impossible kindness. and she had noticed something the archive hadn't mentioned. "They've changed," Vera said quietly. "The architects who went to sleep billions of years ago are not the humans who are waking up today. They've lived countless mortal lives. They've suffered, struggled, failed, and died. They've been slaves and emperors, artists and soldiers, parents and children. They've experienced limitation in ways the architects never did. So they're weaker," Krexter grunted. "Good. We can still contain them." "No." Vera's image leaned forward in the holographic display. "They're different. The architects were alone, infinite individual minds with infinite power. Humanity is collective, billions of limited minds that have learned to create together, to build on each other's ideas, to find meaning through connection rather than omnipotence." The assembly chamber erupted into argument. The destroyers insisted that any risk was too great. 800 species and trillions of souls could not be gambled on Vera's philosophical observations. The suppressors proposed a desperate plan to use ancient technology to reinforce the barriers, to put humanity back to sleep by force. But a new faction was emerging. The shepherds, led by an ancient Minter philosopher named Dulverus, argued that if humanity had truly changed, if they had evolved beyond their godlike origins, then first contact might be possible. Risky, yes, but possible. "Commander Thane," Kelnatha's voice cut through the chaos. "You mentioned a fourth option in your report. You claim to have found something in the Eternal Archive that suggested another path. Explain." Vera called up a section of the archive data. The chamber fell silent as the ancient text materialized, conceptual packets that translated differently for each species, each mind interpreting the pure meaning in its own way. "The Eternals left instructions," Vera said. "They knew this day would come. They prepared for it. There's a protocol, a way to facilitate controlled awakening rather than catastrophic remembering. But it requires direct contact with humanity. Specifically, with the first individuals who begin to consciously experience the awakening." "And such individuals exist?" Dulverus asked, his liquid form rippling with interest. "Yes." Vera pulled up new data, readings from across Earth's surface showing concentrated reality distortion fields. The awakening isn't uniform. It's beginning in specific individuals, mostly young humans whose neural structures are still flexible. Children and adolescents. They're experiencing what they call dreams or visions, but their instruments can't detect what's really happening. They're remembering fragments of what their species once was. One location on Earth glowed brighter than the others. A small city in what humans called North America. There's a child there. Designation, Maya Chen. Age 12 by Earth reckoning. 3 days ago, her reality distortion field intensified by a factor of 10. She's begun manifesting localized impossibilities, objects that shouldn't exist, physics that doesn't behave correctly within a 100-meter radius of her location. The human authorities are investigating it as a hoax or mass hallucination. "But it's not," breathed a young Krelith observer in the galleries. "No," Vera confirmed. "She's beginning to remember how to shape reality. And she's terrified. She thinks she's going insane." The weight of that statement settled over the assembly. A child. A young being experiencing the awakening of godlike power without context, without understanding, without support. "I request permission to make contact," Vera said formally. "To implement the Eternal Protocol. To offer humanity the choice." "What choice?" Krexter demanded. "The choice to remain as they are," Vera replied. "To retain their mortality, their limitations, their beautiful, brief, meaningful lives. Or to remember what they were and accept the consequences. But to make that choice consciously as humans, not as sleeping architects stumbling back toward power they no longer want." The debate that followed lasted 18 hours. Thousands of arguments were made, simulations run, precedents examined. In the end, the vote was closer than anyone had predicted. The shepherds won by a margin of 7%. Vera was authorized to make contact with Maya Chen and implement the awakening protocol. But the assembly fleet would remain at the barrier's edge, weapons charged, ready to sterilize Earth if the awakening proved uncontrollable. One species would stand between humanity and annihilation. Vera hoped she had made the right choice. Maya Chen sat on the roof of her apartment building watching the stars and trying not to think about the fact that she was losing her mind. It had started with dreams. Not normal dreams, these were memories that couldn't be hers. She remembered building stars, setting their fusion rates, tuning the force that held atomic nuclei together. She remembered being vast, ancient, and terribly, terribly lonely. Then the dreams had started bleeding into waking life. 3 days ago, she'd wished for a flower that didn't exist, something combining roses and starlight, and it had grown from her palm. Her mother had screamed. The flower had lasted 6 hours before dissolving into light. Yesterday she'd been angry at a locked door and it had simply stopped being there. Not broken. Not opened. It had ceased to exist, and Maya had somehow known that it had never existed, that reality had quietly edited itself to accommodate her frustration. She was 12 years old and she was remaking the world. Hello, Maya. Maya spun around. Standing on the roof behind her was something impossible. A crystalline figure, roughly humanoid but clearly not human, glowing softly in the darkness. It looked like someone had carved a person from living gemstone and given it motion. Maya should have been terrified. Should have run. Should have screamed. Instead, she felt a strange sense of recognition. As if she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. "You're not human," she said. "No," the being replied. Its voice chimed softly like bells and breaking ice. "My name is Vera Thane. I come from very far away. And I'm here because you need answers." "Am I crazy?" Maya asked. The question came out smaller than she intended. "No," Vera said gently, moving to sit beside her on the roof's edge. "You're waking up." And then she told Maya everything. She spoke of the architects, of beings who had shaped the universe itself before choosing to forget. She explained how humanity was not a young species but an ancient one, gods who had chosen to experience mortality. She described the barriers, the Eternals, the galactic assembly waiting at the edge of the solar system with weapons that could crack the planet like an egg. She told Maya the truth, that what she was experiencing was the beginning of an awakening that could spread to all 8 billion humans. And that the galaxy was terrified of what might happen next. Maya listened to all of it, her young face cycling through disbelief, wonder, and finally, a strange sort of understanding. "I remember," she said quietly when Vera finished. "Not everything. But echoes. I remember being tired of being alone. I remember wanting to be surprised, to not know what would happen next. To be small enough that things could matter again." "Yes," Vera said. "But if I keep remembering," Maya continued, "if I wake up all the way, I'll stop being me. I'll become whatever I was before. Something that doesn't need friends or family or pizza or music or any of the things that make life worth living." "Perhaps," Vera admitted. "That's why I'm here. The Eternals left a protocol, a way to choose. You don't have to become what you were. You can remain what you are. But you need to make that choice consciously, for all humanity." "Me?" Maya's voice cracked. "I'm 12. I can't make decisions for 8 billion people." "You're not," Vera said. "But you're the first to understand what's happening. If you can make the choice, others can follow your example. The awakening can be controlled, guided. Humanity can remember just enough to understand what they gave up and why they should keep that sacrifice." Maya stared out at the city lights below them, at the small, beautiful world humans had built in their forgetting. She thought about her parents, her friends, her art teacher who encouraged her drawing, her little brother who annoyed her but whom she loved fiercely. She thought about being a god and being alone forever. "How do I stop it?" she asked. Vera extended a crystalline hand. "Touch me. Let me show you how to build walls inside your own mind. How to remember without becoming. How to hold the power without using it." Maya hesitated. "Will it hurt?" "Yes," Vera said honestly. "It will hurt terribly. You'll know what you could be and choose to remain limited. You'll feel the weight of mortality and embrace it anyway. It's the hardest thing any being can do, to choose weakness over strength. But I'll still be me? You'll still be you." Maya took Vera's hand. The contact was like touching infinity. Maya felt her consciousness expand, felt the memories of the architects flooding back. The power, the loneliness, the desperate hunger for meaning that had driven them to this desperate solution. She felt herself beginning to dissolve, to become something vast and terrible and utterly alone. And then Vera showed her the walls. Not barriers of force or energy but structures of choice. A framework for containing infinity within the finite. A way to remember without losing yourself. A method the Eternals had developed through countless trials, encoded in the archive waiting for this moment. Maya built the walls inside her mind. It was agonizing. Every instinct screamed at her to let go, to embrace the power, to become what she had been. The architect within her raged against the limitation. But Maya held firm. Because she loved her small life. She loved her stupid arguments with her brother, her mother's terrible jokes, the way the sun felt on her face. She loved not knowing what would happen tomorrow. She loved being human. The walls held. When Maya opened her eyes, Vera was smiling, a strange expression on her alien features. You did it, the Krelith said. You're the first. Now others can follow. All 8 billion of us? Maya asked, exhausted. No. Most will never awaken strongly enough to need walls. The protocol only applies to those who begin to consciously remember. Perhaps a few thousand. Perhaps less. The rest of humanity can remain peacefully asleep, living their mortal lives without ever knowing what they sacrificed. Maya nodded slowly. What happens now? Now, Vera said, I take you to meet the Galactic Assembly, to show them that humanity can be trusted. That you've chosen to remain mortal, to stay human even knowing what you gave up. And if they don't believe us? Vera didn't answer immediately. Finally, then 800 species make a terrible decision, and I will regret it for the rest of my existence. Maya stood, brushing dust from her jeans. She looked at this alien being who had traveled across the galaxy to give humanity a choice. Can I bring my family? Vera's expression softened. Yes, they should see this too. 3 months later, the Galactic Assembly convened not in the sphere of voices but aboard the Crystalline Truth, in orbit around Earth. It was unprecedented, to bring the assembly to the discovered species rather than vice versa. But these were unprecedented circumstances. Maya Chin stood before 800 civilizations, her parents behind her, Vera beside her. She had spent the intervening months learning to manage her awakening, teaching the protocol to other humans who were beginning to remember. There were 43 of them now, scattered across Earth, all of them young, all of them choosing to remain human. We know what we were, Maya told the assembly, her voice translated into 800 languages simultaneously. We remember being the architects. And we're grateful. That caught them off guard. Grateful? You have to understand, Maya continued, we were dying before. Not physically we couldn't die. But meaningfully. When you can do anything, nothing matters. When you know everything, nothing surprises you. When you're alone in perfection, you're just alone. She gestured to her parents, to Vera, to the holographic displays showing Earth rotating peacefully below. We chose to forget so we could discover. We became small so we could grow. We made ourselves mortal so life could have meaning again. And it worked. We've spent billions of years living, dying, learning, creating. We've built civilizations and watched them fall. We've made art and music and stories. We've loved and lost and started over. Maya turned to face the camera directly. Now we're beginning to remember. And you're right to be afraid. If we chose to become the architects again, we could unmake the universe. We could reshape reality to suit ourselves. We could return to lonely perfection. She paused. But we don't want to. The assembly erupted into discussion, but Maya raised her hand. We're proposing a covenant. A partnership. We'll teach you what we know about shaping reality, not to dominate but to create together. We'll share the architect's knowledge of the universe's fundamental laws. In return, you teach us what we forgot, how to be part of a galactic community, how to coexist with other minds, other perspectives, other forms of beauty. And if some humans choose differently? Krexter demanded. If some wish to become architects again? Then we'll deal with that as a species, Maya said firmly. We've built walls in our minds, yes. But there are walls maintained by our choice. Every day, every awakened human chooses again to remain mortal. Because we've discovered something the architects never knew. And what is that? Asked Kelnoth. Maya smiled. That being weak together is better than being powerful alone. The vote took 6 hours. The debate was fierce. But in the end, the covenant was accepted by a margin of 63%. The barriers around Earth fell. Not destroyed but dissolved by mutual agreement. Humanity was welcomed into the Galactic Assembly, not as gods, not as children, but as partners. The Awakening Project began the next day. Teams of humans and aliens working together to map the boundaries of conscious reality shaping, to develop protocols for teaching other species the techniques humanity had rediscovered. It was slow, careful work. There were setbacks. 3 humans lost control and briefly reshaped their local regions before being guided back. 2 alien species tried to abuse the knowledge and had to be stopped. 1 human, a woman in her 50s, chose to fully awaken despite the warnings, became an architect once more, and promptly dissolved herself into the quantum foam because she found the loneliness unbearable. But gradually it worked. The galaxy began to change. Not dramatically. Not catastrophically. But subtly, beautifully, as billions of minds learned they could shape reality not through force but through shared imagination. 5 years after first contact, Vera stood on Earth in a park in what humans called Beijing. Beside her, Maya, now 17, was teaching a class of young beings from 12 different species. They sat in a circle, human children and alien youth together, learning the basic exercises of conscious creation. Remember, Maya was saying, you don't force reality to change. You invite it. You dream together and the universe dreams with you. One of the students, a young luminal, made a small flower of pure light appear in his photonic matrix. The other students applauded. How does it feel? Vera asked Maya quietly. Being mortal when you could be infinite? Maya considered the question. She watched her students, watched the sun setting over the ancient city, felt the cool evening breeze on her skin. It feels like being alive, she said. Really, truly alive. Not existing. Not enduring. But living. She turned to Vera. You know what the architect's biggest mistake was? They thought consciousness was about power. About control. But it's not. It's about connection. About being small enough to fit beside someone else. About being limited enough that what you do matters. Above them, ships from 800 worlds crossed Earth's skies, no longer threatening but trading, learning, sharing. The galaxy had begun to dream together, and in that shared dreaming, something new was being born. Not a return to the age of the architects. Not a continuation of the age of the assembly. Something unprecedented. A cosmos shaped not by gods or by accident, but by countless small minds choosing together, dreaming together, creating together. The universe itself was waking up. Not to power, but to meaning. And in a small park in Beijing, a 17-year-old girl who remembered being a god smiled and taught another generation how to remain beautifully, purposefully human. The awakening was not an ending. It was just the beginning.